The flows that you currently are seeing are from the very traditional corridors. So the US, Africa, Europe, Africa. But then, um, take an example of a market such as Kenya. Saudi Arabia has essentially catapulted itself to the third largest remittance source for the Kenyan market. The GCC region, which is essentially 4 hours away from any African capital, is now employing a huge critical mass of young Africans in those markets. And they still face the same sort of like circumstances, the same architecture of wanting to send value back home. And so when you think about that, the frame and the space is not even, we've not done much. Now, move away from the traditional remittance space of I need to send 25 bucks back home to buy animal feed and think about the high value remittance.
Hey, welcome to the FinTech Frontlines by Cora. This podcast is a collection of timeless ideas on how to build, launch, and operate a fintech in Africa from the most experienced minds in African fintech.
In this episode, Eric Wainana, Grace Maina, and Hyginus Ugumba give a general overview of the remittance space in Africa from their different perspectives. They talk about the trends and share important insights about why the remittance space is not saturated.
If you are, for instance, look at what the remittance space looks like, it would be interesting to just take a back seat and look at it from a historical perspective. The way the financial architecture of the continent of Africa was built, essentially just going back to colonialism, etc., was largely to optimize for transfer of value, the extraction of minerals, goods, and services to Western capitals, and for the processing and value addition of those goods and services, etc. And that essentially meant that whereas we've seen development and we've seen things happening, great things happening on the continent with leadership, etc., the economic growth and the kind of quality of jobs that are generated on the continent are still a bit subsistent, right? It's agriculture, it's mining, but then at a very low level, not the interesting value addition. And so the same modality or the same economic structure that existed that allowed for folks to move, for goods generated on the continent to move to Western capitals for processing and value addition is the same one that has existed with labor. So you're an African, you're very well educated, facing economic pressure back home, you can get a good job, there's high unemployment rates, your earnings are not good enough. And so the consequence of it has had seen this African diaspora move all over the world, work and earn whatever they are. But then the architecture of the African person is that, oh, you need to send money home, family bonds, take care of everyone, build schools, etc. And so that has sort of like now is what we're experiencing with the other shift in value from the Western capitals back home. And so the premise of remittance, when you think about it from like a very, very granular perspective, it boils down to that one single element. Now, that's a very good question about what we are seeing and why everyone is venturing into the space. And if indeed it's not really saturated. I think we've barely scratched the surface. And here's why. The flows that you currently are seeing are from the very traditional corridors. So the US, Africa, Europe, Africa. But then take an example of a market such as Kenya. Saudi Arabia has essentially catapulted itself to the third largest remittance source for the Kenyan market. The GCC region, which is essentially 4 hours away from any African capital, is now employing a huge critical mass of young Africans in those markets. And they still face the same sort of like circumstances, the same architecture of wanting to send value back home. And so when you think about that, the frame and the space is not even, we've not done much. Now, move away from the traditional remittance space of I need to send 25 bucks back home to buy animal feed and think about the high value remittance. So for folks in particularly in Western capitals are looking towards certain things. You want to buy real estate back home, you want to buy a house, you want to buy securities, you want to build, and the infrastructure to send that value cheaper, faster still does not exist, or there's not enough players that are doing that high value remittance space. So I'll give an example, and Grace can attest to this. Kenya is largely a market that has a proliferation of circles, or rather, what you call them, microfinance institutions. And everyone saves through microfinance institutions, but microfinance institutions have still not built the infrastructure that allows for remittance flows to come back. So I can send dollars from my US account, for instance, to my Kenyan bank account in Kenya shillings, that's a regular MFI. And so when you think about that and you look at it from that perspective, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. It's still not done. New corridors, new methodologies, new use cases around remittance. And if you can even go further down and say you want to save for insurance, or you want to pay healthcare for your parents, you live in the UK, how do you do that? So over and above that, I still think that the space is still very, very small, very, very new. And I think it's exciting that you're seeing all these fintechs or all these companies attempt to go into the space and try and create value. I think it's really good for the industry. But over and above that, there's still, from an infrastructure perspective, from a capability perspective, lots and lots and lots of things still need to be done. Those are just my 2 cents. And I know I've spent a lot of time and we're told to speak for two, but in my sense, that's where I do think we've barely seen anything yet.
The market is not saturated for sure. And I also think we're looking at it in the wrong way. It's not about the amount of startups, fintechs within the space, but also realizing who is our competition. Today in Africa, our biggest competition is cash. Yes, we're recording hundreds of billions in remittances. I believe in 2022, 2024, we had about 50 billion, 54 billion USD for sub-Saharan Africa, without counting Egypt and the rest. But the statistics also show that the informal remittances that are cash to cash, that are being passed from Grace, take it to Moyo as you're going back home through using a bus, that is almost 30 to 40% 30 to 40% more than what we are actually recording formally. So the space is not yet saturated. The surface is not yet scratched. There's still a lot more to do. There are still more products that can still accompany remittances. And just outside of the regular and the legacy remittances, which is Western Union, MoneyGram, let's not even start talking about RTGS, etc. There's still a lot that can be done, from delivering transparency, from delivering efficiency, from delivering even something as small as 24-hour support on your app. That is already an opportunity for any startup to pick up on the remittance space.
Remittance industry plays a critical role in Africa, serving as a financial lifeline for, so many Nigerians in diaspora, which is the reason why we founded this company, Cash Remit. So if you look at it, with over, $100 billion in remittance flow into the continent, which is said to be more than the foreign direct investment, and often, official development aid in Africa. So it's a big market. So, I mean, the first thing for every fintech before you go into any market is to, essentially check the size of the market. Remittance was big. I remember back in 2016, when we were looking at the market and, watching the data. And one thing that was always, clicking in our mind is for looking at War Remit with 240 million, investment capital, without operating in the first 1 year. So you could see it's a large market. is a potential and large market. So what we did was to, quickly see how we can, even come into the market and take, even if it's 0.005% share in the market, right? Which is a very good decision. And we into the market to compete with a company that is highly valuated. You don't know how to, get into the market, because whatever you do, you just launch your website and you want to do remittance, and they can chase you away with rates and fees because they are highly valuated. So, but you know, we had the best entrance in the market. Government policies around Africa helped us to, to earn attraction in the market, and we're able to, get over 5,000 users within the first 6 months, which is never happened. Like other businesses in Africa. So when my experience, when you're operating from a diaspora, there are so many challenges. It's hard for you to get funded from the local investors and all that. So cash remit over 5-6 years, we've run, with essential positive cash flow, which has never happened everywhere, because every time I see a lot of companies in Africa, talk about how many millions they have raised in funding, which essentially, because most investors trust you because you're operating, in a jurisdiction that you're very familiar with. It doesn't happen to us in diaspora. But that being said, in all, the industry is big and is growing every day. A lot of people are moving into the diaspora. And one thing that we need to know is the diaspora community, the foreign migration, they are not looking for people who cannot contribute to the community. They are always looking for people who can migrate and start working. And most of the cohort we've seen in recent days are basically for students who are coming to study. And in our own data, students, I mean, before student can be potential remittance, you need to take about 2-3 years before they can mature, to be that potential customers that can, be valuable to a remittance company. So we focus on people who have lived in diaspora for over 10 to 15 years, building, investing in different sectors in Africa. So it's still a viable industry, and the numbers keep going over and over. So I haven't seen anything to say that there won't be any growth in this industry.
Thank you for listening to this episode of FinTech Frontlines. For businesses that want to build in Africa, Cora provides you with delightful payment products for collections, payouts, and settlements. Learn more at corahq.com. Like and rate this podcast so more people like you can find it.